Good morning, homesteaders. I'm Joe with Premier One Supplies, and I have the privilege to introduce Shawn and Beth Dougherty this morning. Shawn and Beth have been farming together since the 1980s for the last 26 years in eastern Ohio, where they manage 27 acres designated as by the state as not suitable for agriculture, as well as a monastery farm of 100 acres. Using intensive grazing as the primary source of food energy, they raise dairy and beef cows, sheep, farm-fed hogs, and a variety of poultry, producing most of the food and feed on the farm. Concerned that farming is so often dependent upon multiple off-farm resources, from feed, fuel, and fertilizer to water and electricity, their ongoing project is to identify and test the means by which farming was done for centuries with a minimum of off-farm inputs. Their research has led them to identify grass conversion, especially the daily conversion of grass into milk by dairy ruminants, as a key to whole farm sustainability, feeding the whole farm community, humans, ruminants, pigs, poultry, and soil. The rate and travel on farming, dairying, and farm-raised animal foods, and off-grid water capture systems. Shawn and Beth are the authors of The Independent Farmstead, published by Chelsea Green Publishing, and The Independent Farmstead's Field Guides to Input-Free Farming and Homesteading at lulu.com. They're wonderful people, and they're going to give a great talk.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe, very much. We really like Premier. Please bow your heads. Thank you, Lord, for this conference, for all who made it happen, and all who are providing for all of our needs this weekend. Help Beth and I and all of the instructors to offer sound wisdom that leads us always to you, Lord, and your farming patterns. And may everyone realize that they must get a dairy cow on their farm. Amen.
Amen.
So we're going to talk a little bit about us to begin with, but it won't be very much. Our website is One Cow Revolution. Our email is ShawnandBeth1960@gmail.com. Anytime that you run into problems, any hurdles, anything that you would say, I got to give up on homesteading, you email us, and we will get you off that ledge. Anytime you run into problems, especially with dairy cows, you email us. And we're going to help you understand what the problem is with that. Because, and if we don't know, we'll pass you on to somebody else who may know. We do have a son who's a veterinarian. He was at Ohio State University, so in the commercial, trained in the commercial, we have to educate him. But
he knows a lot we don't know, too.
He does. So in any event, we are about trying to make sure that you guys have success. It's really important to us. That's our mission. We're not going to answer phone calls probably, but email we can do. So please email us as you have issues. That is our book. We were looking for the book that would teach us how to farm the way Grandpa used to farm before there were feed stores, and how we can feed from the farm. And we were looking and looking, and we couldn't find it. So finally, after years of doing it, we wrote it. So that's what it is. Our booth is right over here. We also have some small field guides on different areas that go a little bit further than the book. And people would start emailing us and saying, okay, tell me more about this thing. And we turned a lot of that into a next, into some field guides. That's right. Okay, so we're going to talk about the dairy cow, and we're going to talk about milk today. What do we do with all that milk? So grass is the biggest food energy source on the planet, okay? Your farm is going to grow grass. You match your ruminant to whatever kind of pasture you have, and eventually, if it's briars and stuff like that, you bring in the goat, you let the goat eat that up, you get the goat off the farm as soon as possible, and you replace it with the cow.
Goat people see me later.
That's right.
I got it.
Now, it grows for free. It can sustain your cow. You do not have to give your cow any grain whatsoever at any time in its life. People are going to tell you, oh, no, you can't do that. That is wrong. We have been doing it for way too long that our cows never see grass. And
never see grain.
Never see grain.
Grain.
They only see grass. And in pasture, we are now to a point where we are pasturing them all year round, okay? So with stockpile forage and other tricks, and hopefully next year we'll be back to giving a talk on the dairy cow. But ours are on pasture all year round. We have to have hay for about 3 weeks.
And that's not because we don't have grass. It's just that I'm too lazy to go out and break ice on snow. So when we have snow and then it ices over, I'll throw bales out instead of going and breaking the ice so the cows can graze.
So cows are wonderful, and you can either have a one-time harvest, okay, or you can have a twice daily harvest every day of that cow being on the farm. Also, cows live for a very long time. Okay, we've heard about 30 years. The family dairy cow can be the cow that feeds your children from birth to leaving the family.
To adults, right.
To adults.
One cow
Okay.
can live long enough to help you raise all your kids. Now, our kids are spread out over 21 years, so that might be a little bit of a stretch for a cow, but our oldest cow right now is 13, and she's just hit middle age.
Milk used to be, everybody knew when they would farm, that milk was the basis of the whole farm economy, that it feeds everything on the farm. It feeds us with cheese and butter and all the things that it does. It feeds your chickens. It feeds your pigs. It feeds everything on the farm. So those of you who are buying in feed, you need a milk cow who is going to replace all of that. It will transform your farm. You will love it. And it is not the ball and chain that you think it is. Okay? So we're not going to talk too much about it, but we can't help it. So come to our booth over there if you have further questions about the dairy cow and how to make the dairy cow work for you. Yes, and so everyone needs the dairy cow. You're going to start bringing milk in, and 3 days after you get your cow, you will need to have a pig, because you will have enough milk coming in that it's time to get the pig. We want you to be comfortable with every step and stage so that you can value milk as the homestead superfood that it is.
So just for fun, let's see a show of hands. Like, how many people have dairy animals right now? That's lots of folks. Do you know 10 years ago when we used to ask that question, it was like maybe 1 or 2 hands, because most people didn't, they thought, like, if I want to end my life in an unpleasant way, I'll go get a dairy cow. But, you know, we had this image, right, that means slavishly milking a cow twice a day, probably at 4 o'clock in the morning the first time. And it was hours and hours of unremitting work. And I'm really glad to see how that notion has dissipated. And there are lots and lots of dairy animal owners in a group like this. So the next step after we get our animal, and here we are, turning our default forage, the harvest that we're going to have no matter what, into proteins, fats, and sugars every day to feed the whole farm. The next thing we run into is like, okay, 3 gallons of milk coming in the back door every day. What on earth am I going to do with that? And what do? We automatically shove it in the refrigerator. Like day 3, there's no room anymore. Neighbors start banging on the door and want us to sell them often illegal raw milk products. Hooray for that. Only
go rogue.
That's right, go rogue, right? Sell them, rent them a bottle and just happen to fill it with milk before you send it out. But let's first figure out all the uses for that milk on the farm. We need to get away from the notion that it has to be refrigerated. We need to get away from the notion that it has this cash value. You know what happens is the milk comes in and we think, I could sell this for $10, $12, $13 a gallon. And then we don't want to use it in any way that doesn't reflect that proposed cash value. And so really often people go, well, what I'll do is I'll sell a bunch of this, and then I can buy all my animal feeds, and I'll have this good system going where the animal feed is paid for, which is nice, maybe, so long as the economic system stays in place. But the minute we have maybe difficulties on the open market of any kind, we can't use cash, maybe we can't sell our milk, we're back to point A. So let's talk about all the ways that that milk is really your sunlight and rainfall collected on your farm, harvested by you and your cow, and it's going to feed the whole farm. First, milk is naturally probiotic. when it comes out of the teat of the animal you're milking, it is already inoculated with all the lactobacilli that make things like yogurt, buttermilk, sour cream, and cheese happen. So it's a product in the making. It's a product with a destiny. We all know who keep cows that if you leave raw milk sitting out for, say, a week on the counter, at the end of that time, you'll have a lot of whey and a small whitish lump of curd, very tart curd. So what that demonstrates is that raw milk all by itself wants to become other products, and we can help that happen on our farm and find uses for all those products. Why does the USDA inform us that drinking raw milk is like playing Russian roulette? Because they're not testing our milk. Raw milk is naturally probiotic. Raw milk that has been run through a commercial milk collection system, miles and miles of plastic pipeline that cannot be scrubbed out every time, is indeed at risk of being inoculated with pathogenic bacteria. A biofilm builds up on the inside of a commercial collection system, a long pipeline milk machine system, right? And that can, in time, become home to things like Listeria and E. coli 157H7, which is the bad guy. And then the raw milk that the USDA is testing, which is coming from commercial farms, can indeed be pathogenic, and I myself would not drink it. But first, we're going to just forget we're going to erase the possibility that our farm-produced raw milk is dangerous, needs flash cooling, is going to become toxic, pathogenic, bad for us. We're going to clear that one off the table before we move forward.
Okay, I just want to say that I appreciate that Beth is letting me join this talk because I do milk the cows, and then I bring the milk in, and then I clean the buckets, and then it goes to her, and all the other things she does. I have no idea what she does with all the other things.
You drink a lot of it.
Oh, no, I drink a lot of it. That's right. That's true. Okay, so we do refrigerate it.
Sometimes.
Yes, refrigerating is, we used to do a herd share, and people would come and we would give them their milk, and then they would stand and talk to us for a very long time, and we're thinking, that milk needs to be refrigerated, and then they would call us and say, the milk had a little bit of a funny taste or something, and we think, well, you were standing on and it was hot. So refrigerate your milk, but don't get obsessive about it. Some people get, oh, it's got to be flash cooled, and it's got to be all those. We don't do any of that. We simply, we filter ours. Okay, now these products are from the Shenandoah Homestead. I'm sorry.
That's right, Shenandoah Homestead Supply, which is like down there.
We've been looking and looking for good product, and these are good product. Okay, so we would recommend these product. This bucket, we really like the one where the handle is cut out instead of being tacked on. Okay, these stand up a lot better. We deal with stainless steel. That's what we want to do, and then we go to glass. That's it. They do have milking machines. We do not recommend milking machines. We think it's a lot better for people to be hand milking. It's better for the cow. So just to let you know.
If you've got arthritis or there's some reason why you need a milking machine, by all means, because you also need a milk cow. But if you're only milking 2 to 6 cows, the amount of time you save milking with a milking machine, you're going to lose cleaning that milking machine. And milking machines are opportunities for your milk. I'm not talking about pathogenically becoming contaminated, but off flavors often are the result of using a milking machine. So we just recommend that you not think immediately, there's a machine for that, I'll go get one, that's how I ought to do it.
Okay, so it also, we do not necessarily recommend a lid for these. Okay, maybe for moving it back to the house, but when you're milking, it would be very hard, even the ones that have the cutout lids. So when you do that, that means you're going to have some stuff drop down in here, okay? If that grosses you out, you're not a homesteader, okay? So then we do have this, which is a filter that with a removable, or we have, these are throwaway filters. I like the throwaway filters. She doesn't like the throwaway filters.
One day we won't be able to get them.
That's right. But in any event, these throwaway filters are great, and that's what we use, and that's all that we do, okay? We're filtering them into glass, and then they are going into the refrigerator, okay? So if that's what we're doing, if we're just drinking it, that's all that we do. It's totally raw. There's no other anything else that we do, no other straining or anything like that. When there is a seasonal glut, we may make cheese out of it. We are skimming it, and with the skimming, what we want to do is make sure that we are putting it in a jar that has a big enough lid that you can reach in with a ladle and do that. Those who are trying to use turkey basters to do that,
You're making your life more difficult.
yeah.
Go with the ladle.
And don't worry if you're not getting it all, okay? You're going to see that I'm reaching in there, and I actually do this part, and I reach in there and I get the cream that I'm skimming off the top, and I'm putting it in another container. That's the next morning, okay, because it's going to take that long. We do not think that you need to get a separator, okay? We've never had a separator, and my mom grew up doing that, and she said, have you ever tried to clean a separator? She said the amount of energy that it goes into is not worth it. So we do not do the separator thing. Yes, and when there is a seasonal glut, we'll make cheese, but we are getting fabulous things. We are getting butter, and we are getting sour cream, and that's why I cannot lose any weight, because we are eating way too well. The skimmed milk is skimmed whole milk puts grocery store milk to shame.
When you let milk separate just by gravity, what's happening is the less dense fat and the milk bearing that fat is rising to the top of your milk. It's not nearly all the fat in the milk. So if you're keeping a cow and you dip or skim 12 hours after you've set that milk to cool wherever you set it, you're not taking nearly all that fat. So what you're drinking, if you drink that skim milk afterward, is a lot closer to whole milk from the grocery store than it is to skim milk from the grocery store. So as much as I am totally behind Weston A. Price and consuming butterfat, you don't have to shake your milk up and drink it whole when, in the wintertime, if your cows are on stockpiled forage, like a third to a half of that milk may be cream, and you are not obliged for your health's sake to consume it all as drinking milk. You can skim it off and make butter with it.
And any of the waste product from, as I've mentioned, goes to the animals. It is a great protein supplement for the animals. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but there should be absolutely no waste of any milk. It is way too precious.
So to start with, I just want to some of you may be perfectly familiar with how milk cultures, what is going on when milk ferments, but I want to go over that a little bit because it's part of how we become comfortable with the idea that milk at any temperature is never going to go bad. Raw milk does not go bad. Even the USDA will admit that because it is legal to sell 60-day-old raw milk aged cheese. How many foods do you know that are like toxically contaminated when they're fresh, but if you wait 60 days, they're fine, right? Well, raw milk is fine after 60 days. And that's because that natural fermentation that I was talking about, where the teats of mammals are populated with lactobacilli. The Lord God Almighty said, let me make milk and animals that feed their own young. But milk is such a high-quality food product. Let me protect that milk by supplying those animals with beneficial lactobacilli who will keep it always safe to consume. How do they do that? Milk has lactose in it. That's milk sugar. Lactobacilli consume lactose and turn it into lactic acid, which lowers the pH of the milk over time. And it is because that happens that all the wonderful things that we can make with milk are possible. Let me see if I'm supposed to go straight through with that. Yes, indeed. So by lowering the pH, what they make happen is milk is full of proteins, a bunch of different kinds, including at least one kind, usually two kinds of beta-casein. And proteins are long, complicated molecules. And when the pH goes down, they like to link hands and shrink. Picture, I hate computers, but let's picture for a minute a computer image of a 3D matrix, right? Just this big network of parts. That's what your protein is doing. And as the pH drops, those proteins, They're long, complicated molecules. They're like origami. They like to fold up in complicated patterns. And when they're all linked together and they start to fold up, what you've got is a curd that's trapping the milk solids, the food value of the milk, most of it, inside of the curd and shrinking. That's why when we leave that jar of milk on the counter for a week, when we come back at the end of the week, we have a jar full of yellowish whey and that nice lump in the bottom. Your jar made a single curd of milk solids, and it shrank over time, trapping most of the food value of the milk in that lump. Cheese making is simply a way of doing that under controlled conditions where we can make sure we like the cheese after we've made it. If we do it in that simple leave it on the counter method, what we're going to have at the end of the week is something that is so high in lactic acid, we're not going to want to eat it. Very sour. So cheese making is simply a way of hurrying along the shrinking of the curd before the lactic acid has built up to the point where we don't like the flavor. So when you start dealing with raw milk and you refrigerate it, because that's what Americans do, and it tastes sweet when you first put it in there, and then over time it moves toward just not delightful, what's happening is the gradual reduction of the amount of lactose in there. With all ferments, at least all ferments I know of, and probably most of you can confirm this from some part of your experience, fermented foods are things that when they're fresh and not fermented, they taste great, and when they're fermented, they taste great, and when they're in the beginning, in the middle stage, we're like, ugh. Like if you make sauerkraut, the stages of making sauerkraut, we hide them in the basement, right? They smell funny, they look funny, you think, I'm gonna eat that. And then once it's made, it's delicious. So you have to be prepared for that to happen with your milk products, that there are going to be stages where your experience of smelling and tasting it is bleh. But that does not mean the milk is bad. And just be prepared for that, because often, like your smell and taste will tell you something is delicious, and that's a good message. You want to listen to that message. But just know that that middle ground where you go, yeah, I'm not sure I like this, is not a signal to your brain that this food isn't good for you anymore. The jungle in your kitchen.
Well, what is clever? Do you want to do that one? Or?
No, I'm going to jump it.
Okay.
So one last word of advice. When you first start dealing with raw milk in any space, you're moving, and we're going to assume it's your kitchen, you're moving into a space that already has a jungle's worth of molds, bacteria, and yeasts that live there. They like your house, they like how humid it is, they like the foods you eat, the cleaning products you use, your methods, and they live there, and you don't notice them because you're used to them. And when a piece of bread that you leave on the counter turns blue, you don't say, oh my gosh, what happened? You say, oh, it got moldy, and you feed it to the pigs or the chickens, and you don't worry about it. But when those bacteria first encounter raw milk in your house, they're going to say, oh my gosh, a bonanza, and they're going to jump in and have families, as well as the families that your lactobacilli that are already in the milk are having, and there's going to be some competition. So when you first start managing raw milk in a space that's not used to it, you're going to get bubbles in your milk, you're going to get some funky flavors and smells. They're not going to hurt you, but they're going to make you say, I just can't make cheese, or my butter is weird. Push through. Believe in this, because what happens is that kitchen that was already full of a jungle of little probiotics, right, is now joined by a bunch of milk that's going to go airborne, and it's going to be on your walls, your utensils, your hands, your air, your counters, and pretty soon a lot of lactobacilli, good beneficial ones that you love and you like the taste of, are going to outcompete a bunch of your other ones that were already there. There's a reason why cheeses are named after places, and that's because every place has its own, sort of set of conditions and humidity and soil type and so forth. And over time, if we manage dairy in that place, it becomes a place that gives a character to a milk product. Trust that your kitchen, your farm will become that kind of a place, and trust that the sometimes kind of funky things your milk does in the beginning are A-okay, and you're moving toward a good place.
So Beth is an expert on doing all these wonderful things with milk, making butter and stuff like that, and she's going to do that next. I am an expert on drinking milk. I really know how to do that. We insist on getting at least 2 gallons of drinking milk coming into the family every day because that's what we do.
We do
drink
have 8
tons and
kids,
tons
but
of
there are
milk.
only 4.5 people living in that house right
But
now,
we
and
still
we still
drink
go
a
through those
lot
2
of milk.
gallons.
Okay, but with that in mind, I know that people are emailing us and saying, I'm tasting my milk and it's not good, okay, or I have a different flavor. So we have a few things that if you have any problems with your drinking milk that we could suggest, okay? First of all, if you have a Barney flavor or a Cowie flavor or smell, often what that is associated with is a milking machine. That's the first thing that we ask is, are you milking by hand or are you milking with machine? And they will say, often they'll say, I'm milking with a machine. And we say, try milking by hand. So if you are having that kind of problem, we would suggest shifting to hand milking because a lot of times that takes care
And
of
if
it.
it's not that, try washing your udders clean. You know, we only use warm water and a clean towel, but just make sure you're getting stuff, whatever stuff, off the cow's udder before you do your milking.
Yeah, and clean more thoroughly. Okay, if you're getting a salty flavor, oftentimes that has to do with mastitis. We have a theory that why the mastitis milk might taste a little salty is that a calf will like salt, and what the solution is to mastitis is having more milk, milking more
thorough
often.
milking, yeah.
And we're thinking that maybe that would cause the calf to do that. So, but in any event, sometimes it is a mastitis issue, and the solution is for you to milk maybe more often. We did that one time. We had a little bit of mastitis. We came back regularly, and man, it wiped it out very quickly.
We milked twice a day, but we were coming back in between those milkings, just clearing her out. We don't see much mastitis, and we don't expect you guys to, except under unusual circumstances. But it's good to know that that salty flavor is your signal to start milking a little more thoroughly.
We would say for mastitis, don't immediately jump to antibiotics. Oftentimes, mastitis is simply not really a big problem. It is that the cow laid down on her udder a little bit differently or something like that and caused it. So don't go to the big solutions first. Try milking it out, and we almost always leave our calf on the cow, so that will often clear it up too. Bitter or odd flavors often can be a hygiene issue, or it could also be the forages that the animal is eating. So if it gets into onion grass or turnips, those will have a very strong flavor. One of the things that we have discovered, though, is I would say that I discovered it, but not that I discovered it, that I could describe it to you, but I can never remember how it works. So I'm going to have my wife describe how it works. The number of hours before milking that the animal gets the plant.
Oh, okay, so this is counterintuitive to me.
I have buttons for my wife, and I press a button.
You press a button and I talk.
Yes.
And then he has to press another button or I don't stop.
That's right.
So this is counterintuitive to me. I would have thought, oh, the more hours before the milking the strong flavored food was consumed by the cow, the more of it makes it into the milk. No. If a cow consumes a strong flavored forage, turnip, onion grass, right, in the couple of hours before you milk her, that is going to strongly flavor her milk. If a cow has gotten into, probably a ton of you know this, if she eats onion grass an hour or two before you milk her, you're going to give that milk straight to the pigs. It is going to smell just like she ate a bunch of raw garlic. Blech. The great thing about intensive rotational grazing, daily or twice daily moves onto fresh forage, is that those strong flavored forages are her medicinal forages, and she's a very smart girl. When she moves onto her new paddock, she's going to wander around and choose those forages first. If you're used to moving your cow off and you know she'll like move in, what's the first thing she takes a bite of? Like milkweed? You think, are you kidding me? She's eating it at the top of her grazing period, which means that by the time you milk her 12 hours later, that flavor will be gone. It's only if you move back to once every 3 days milking, and she has a big, pasture moves, and she has a big paddock to move around in, then she has a much better chance of finding that onion grass right before you milk her. So just bear in mind, bitter or off flavors, strong flavors, sometimes funky colors like green flakes of butterfat in the milk are forage issues. They're not going to hurt you, But if you don't like the way they're flavoring the milk, think about going to once or twice a day paddock moves, and that will cut down on that irregularity.
Okay, so Beth is going to go into all the things that we do with milk. Just a heads up. We had the School of Traditional Skills come to our farm, and they did a couple of classes, one on the cow and then one on what Beth's about ready to do. So if you want to see that, go to the School of Traditional Skills. You have to get behind their paywall, but you will see we really enjoyed them. We think that they do really good work, and we were... oh, and you'll see her actually doing this. It's all filmed. So just a heads up on that.
And he's going to do the PowerPoint, so I'm going to try and
Yes,
notice what he's
I will.
doing. Okay, so where were we?
Butter.
Butter making, okay. Okay, so probably a lot of you know how to make butter, and in that case you know that butter is super easy to make 90 to 95% of the time, and then it's like somebody flipped a switch, and it's really hard to make and full of difficulties. So I'm going to walk you through a few of these difficulties. So basics of butter making. Fill your churn half full. It's going to double in volume or nearly double in volume as you churn it, and you don't want it coming out the top. It's going to, your butter is going to come better and form better if the cream is chilled but not too cold. It won't come if it's too cold, and it will be mushy and soft and fluffy and slimy if it's too warm. So aim for about 55 degrees. Something that often gets in people's way, especially if they keep a cream separator, is that you'll try and churn cream when it is too fresh. Yes, I meant too fresh. The traditional way of making butter would be to skim your milk over the course of several days, the cream going into this pre-refrigeration, cream going into a crock, probably the churn, until enough cream has accumulated that it's worth the farm wife's time to churn. Well, over that holding period time, the cream is, of course, fermenting, it's souring, and so the pH drops. That pH drop that we talked about when it comes to curd shrinking is also going to make the butter fat in our milk want to come together. So if you're frustrated with butter making because your butter's not coming and you've been doing it with very fresh cream, try leaving it out for a little bit longer or leave it in the refrigerator for a couple more days and let that pH drop a little bit. Where am I? Okay, so when you've made butter, butter is a very stable product. It does not want to go bad. Buttermilk, on the other hand, no raw milk product goes bad. Let me rephrase that. Butter doesn't get nasty on its own. It will hold for a long period of time. Buttermilk is going to go on fermenting, and so if we don't get all the buttermilk out of our butter, the buttermilk will, those little bits that are in there are going to ferment, and they are going to make our butter taste cheesy. Now, cheesy flavored butter is delicious, and you can do a lot with it. But if what you want is sweet butter to go on your morning toast, you need to wash your butter so that all the buttermilk is removed, or virtually all the buttermilk is removed. If you don't have refrigeration, then you need to err toward getting your wash water to run really clear. If you're using refrigeration, not so much. So you can wash your butter by pouring off the buttermilk out of your churn after your butter's come, adding cold water, running the churn, pouring off the water, adding more cold water, and do that repeatedly. Or you can drain off the buttermilk and wash your butter. This picture was obviously posed because that butter bowl is way too clean.
She's going to point down there. But
oh, right. This picture was obviously done for the camera because that butter bowl is way cleaner than it would really be. But you can also wash your butter in the butter bowl. I use a wooden bowl because it doesn't conduct heat very well, and so my bowl doesn't warm up and my butter doesn't slip around a lot. In this picture, I'm using a wooden spoon. That was years ago. Jake at Fallen Aspen, which is right around the corner, he's the guy selling the wooden spoons, made my butter paddle. Actually, he said, draw me a butter paddle, I'll make several, you pick one, and then I'll know how to make them. And he made me the excellent one I've been using for years, so I send you to him if you need a butter paddle. Any old wooden bowl will do, although what you want is hardwood, so don't don't go for the cheap end, but I prefer a butter bowl that has steep sides because it gives me something to work my butter against. And you're simply you're not sliding the butter around in the bowl, you're using your wooden paddle to press and fold the butter against the side of the butter bowl until you've worked as much of the water that's left in your butter out as possible. Then you're going to salt it. Salt it to taste. A couple of shakes, add the butter, taste it, see if you like it. If you want to store this butter passively, I'm talking in your basement, no refrigeration, you can work about a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of salt into a pound of butter. It's going to be very salty, and pack it in a crock, like, white farm crock. Pack it in tight to exclude air, and then cover it with like a disc of butcher paper, wax paper, parchment paper, right? That's just to keep air from getting in and making the top layer rancid. You can actually store it like that in your basement sort of indefinitely. The more buttermilk you get out of your butter, the sweeter that butter's going to taste when you go to use it. Yes, it's too salty. How do we fix that? We scoop some out, put it back in the butter bowl, add cold water, and work the butter. Because the salt is water soluble, you're just going to wash enough salt out of the butter now so that it tastes the way you want it to taste when you go to use it.
Okay, so here are some butter troubleshooting. You have already done some.
Okay, so butter troubleshooting. If your cream is too fresh, it's not going to want to come. So you can add some starter, like some buttermilk from the last time you did this, you could use some yogurt, so that you are boosting the lactobacilli in that cream so that you can hurry it along toward getting acidic enough that it will come. If your cream is too cold, again, put it on the counter, let it warm up a little bit. If your cow is close to calving, one of the things I love about keeping cows is that it's like going to a school where all your ancestors can actually show up and tell you stuff, because this particular fact, for instance, that colostrum cream will not churn. We had to learn it by doing it, and then Shawn found it in some old piece of French literature somewhere where a guy couldn't get his butter to come, and the village priest said, your cow is too close to calving. Sure enough, colostrum doesn't churn. Even a little bit of colostrum in your milk as a whole can make all that cream not churn. So if you're very frustrated because that butter will not come, go look at your calendar and see whether one of your cows is expecting a calf soon. And of course, it's the neighbor's fault. Go look at the records of the Salem witch trials.
So
I'm not
if you
kidding
live
you.
next to a witch,
That's right. I'm not kidding you. Because butter is so easy to make, and then it has these inexplicable and frustrating refusals to come. This lady said, I hope none of your neighbors got burned at the stake. But like some of the accusations brought against those poor women was, like, I know Goody gave me the evil eye because my butter wouldn't come the next day. That's how frustrating that can be. So where are we?
to cheese, I think.
Okay. I don't usually,
what is
usually we're
clabbered?
tossing it back and forth.
What is clabbered milk?
Okay, so back to our milk. It's coming in the door. We need first to recognize that no refrigerator is big enough to hold all this milk, so we need to start refrigerating only the milk that we need to stay cool for whatever reason. We want it not to ferment. Reason number one, everybody in the family likes drinking cold, sweet milk, so we are going to refrigerate our drinking milk. But we don't have to refrigerate all the milk that we're going to use for other purposes. And when you've got 1, 2, 3, multiple gallons of milk coming into the house every day, which is just your sunlight and rainfall caught by grass and converted into proteins, fats, and sugars by your cow, you've got a resource to power your whole farm. And most of the farm doesn't care if that milk ever gets refrigerated, if it's sweet or sour. So what's going to happen if you leave milk sitting out is it's going to clabber. That means it's going to form a soft curd. That protein matrix that happens when the lactobacilli are active in your milk and they make it acidic, that's going to, first of all, make your milk thick. And at that point, you may or you may not like the flavor. The buttermilk, that those of us who are old enough to remember buttermilk as a drinking product, That buttermilk doesn't have to be the result of making butter. It just used to be always the result of making butter. That's a delicious, sour, probiotic product that you can drink or you can use in a lot of ways on the farm. You can make soft lactic cheeses with it. So say, yesterday's milk, there was no room for it in the fridge. We left it on the counter. We come down in the morning. It was a hot night, and we've got thick clabber. One thing we can do with that is strain it through cheesecloth and make the world's best soft cheese. You can use it, once you've drained a lot of the whey off of it and you like the texture, salt it. You can add herbs. You can salt it, drain it a little bit more, make it firm, salt the outside, and you can actually make a young aged cheese with that. But sooner or later, probably sooner, you've got 3 pounds of soft cheese in the fridge, and you've got another day's milk you didn't have room in the fridge, you didn't need it for drinking, you left it out, it's clabber now, and you don't need any more soft cheese. What are you going to do? It's perfect pig and chicken food. Old books always say clabber was a pig and chicken food. I want to note right here that it's not because you don't feed it to pigs and chickens until it clabbers. It's only that pre-refrigeration, it would be clabbered. Any extra milk, sweet, fresh, any extra milk is appropriate as pig and chicken food. Yes, chickens will drink milk. Pigs would rather have milk than anything else on the planet. So it's always going to be good pig and chicken food. Clabber is a great starter for cheese. In a minute, I'm going to talk about making...
You have 20 minutes.
Okay. I'm going to talk about making where we get the mesophilic and thermophilic cultures that are used in cheese making. And room temperature clabber is going to be mesophilic. It's a great cheese starter. So if you're making, say, a Gouda, that's a good starter for it. And it's also, because it's acidic, it's the kind of milk that our grandmas used to use for doing any kind of baking that included baking soda, because it'll activate the baking soda with its acid. So the difference between mesophilic and thermophilic cultures in milk is simply the temperature you held the milk at. Mesophilic means it likes middle temperatures. Thermophilic means it likes warmer temperatures. Yogurt is simply thermophilic milk culture. You took milk and you held it between 90 and 110 degrees for 8 hours, and you got yogurt. And what you've got, if you started with raw milk, is a very wide array of thermophilic lactobacilli that make the best yogurt on the planet, and it make really good cheeses that call for thermophilic cultures. Like if you make cultured mozzarella, this is your culture for that. God bless Ricky Carroll and New England Cheesemaking Supply, but forget ordering from them, because your milk already has more cultures in it than they can sell you. So hold milk between 90 and 110 degrees for 8 hours. You get fresh raw milk yogurt, and it is also your thermophilic culture for any cheese making you want to do. Just a note, if you like your yogurt very thick, the way Americans tend to, like spoon thick, not drinking thick, if you bring your milk up to 170 degrees, that's good and hot, hold it for 5-10 minutes, cool it down, then inoculate it with raw milk yogurt, soft raw milk yogurt, so that you have all the same cultures. You'll get a thick yogurt that way, and it'll be a raw milk yogurt because you inoculated it that way. The milk you made the yogurt with was cooked, but your inoculant was raw milk yogurt. If you didn't get that, ask me later. Mesophilic milk cultures are simply what happens at room temperature. Think 70 to 90 degrees. So when you have a recipe that calls for, a cheese recipe that calls for mesophilic culture, what we're talking about is simply room temperature clabber or buttermilk, right? So that nice thick milk that was on the counter after you left the milk sitting out on a warm night, that's your mesophilic culture. It's a wide array of beneficial lactobacilli. And if you're making cheeses like Gouda, Gouda is a washed curd recipe. It's at slightly lower temperatures than mozzarella. Mesophilic culture, mesophilic starter culture, is what's called for, and you've already got it on your farm. Forget ordering off. You don't need a DVI freeze-dried culture. You're just going to use your room temperature clabber to do that. Basic cheese making. Cheese making is as simple as your milk lactobacilli reproduced and consumed lactose and made your milk acidic. When you had a thick milk, you drained it. You're going to salt it, and in most cases, you're going to age it. That's all there is to cheese making. So when you get your cow and you start having more milk than you know what to do with, and you say, oh, I need to make milk. I need to make cheese. Go buy every book you can find on cheese making, and then burn every one of them, except David Asher's The Art of Natural Cheesemaking from Chelsea Green, and read that one. I am not necessarily recommending David's recipes. They can be a little exotic. No, that's not the way I want to put it. He uses kefir for his starter. Kefir is not just lactobacilli. It's also yeasts and some other mysterious things we don't know about. And you can get some funky results when you start cheese making and you use that starter. But what David has is the basic philosophy and theory of cheese making that will make it very clear to you this is a natural product and I am simply helping it along. If anybody insists on litmus paper or a very sensitive thermometer for your cheese making, throw it out and start on something else. This is going to be true of anything you do in farming. If it looks too complicated and takes too much math, you've got the wrong instructions.
Remember, Laura and Mary's mom did this.
This is intuitive. This is not that hard. So where am I? Is it another?
Making soft cheeses now.
Making soft
Or is it
cheese
this?
protein. No, I already did that.
Okay.
So how many people have made mozzarella? How many people made mozzarella with citric acid? Okay, but quite a few hands went up, but not all of them. So a lot of us already know that you do not require citric acid for mozzarella making. There's a class of cheeses called pasta filatas, which just means I stretched it. And it's popular, you know, like you see the recipes for making mozzarella that call for citric acid, and you can make the mistake of thinking that's how mozzarella is made. Citric acid mozzarella is kind of a party trick. Voila, in a moment, I made mozzarella. Real mozzarella, or cultured mozzarella, pardon me, I won't say real. Cultured mozzarella is made as a slower process by fermenting milk with thermophilic lactobacilli, in other words, yogurt. And so cultured milk mozzarella is just one example of the pasta filatas, the stretched cheeses that you can make with no, the only special tool I have is a cheap $10 analog thermometer from the hardware store. And the only special ingredient we use for cheese making is rennet. You probably have a rennet-bearing plant already growing on your farm, so you can do some research and look at plants that bear rennet. Keep in mind that most of the time, rennet-bearing plants are also bitter flavored, so they can affect the outcome of your cheeses. The traditional mild rennet that people use is chymosin from the, I think, abomasum of baby ruminants that have not turned to a diet of grass. And unless you feel like slaughtering a baby calf or lamb or goat kid, you're probably going to buy your rennet right now. And that you can get from Ricky Carroll's New England Cheesemaking Supply. The kind we use is, do you remember? It'll come to me. But at any rate, I'm going to recommend that you use animal rennet.
I don't even know how to spell rennet.
Is animal rennet because it's going to give you the most, the milder tasting results that you're probably expecting to begin with.
I think you're the hard cheeses, aren't you?
Okay, so making hard cheeses. You're going to, when you set out to make hard cheeses, if you haven't already read David Asher's The Art of Natural Cheesemaking, one of the things you're going to run into is, I just said the only special equipment I use is a thermometer. Well, that's not what you're going to see in most hard cheese making instructions. I want you to go out of here thinking, I have the tools in my kitchen to make first-class aged hard cheeses. How is that possible if we don't own a water jacket, which is a way of warming milk very slowly? Well, keep in mind that for normal people like us to actually own a metal pot comes way late in the history of cheese making. People were making cheese without metal pots for centuries, and they would use wooden vats. which cannot be placed on a fire. You're not going to make a water jacket out of those. How did people heat up milk before they had, or heat up curds before they had water jackets? That they used a wash curd method, which means you use hot water added to curds that have already formed. Remember, our milk clabbers, and that's a curd. When you cut that curd, and you're just, if you make mozzarella, you know that you're trying to cut it into cubes of the same size, roughly. When you cut that curd, what you've just done is made a whole lot of curds, because each little individual piece is now its own protein matrix that's going to shrink and trap milk solids inside of it. And you can warm those curds by adding hot water. So our hard cheese making process is as simple as taking milk, warming it up, not necessarily adding a culture, because my milk is already cultured. It's raw milk. I haven't done anything to it, so I know I have my culture present. So I warm it up. I add some rennet. What does rennet do? Rennet makes the curd happen before the lactic acid in the milk is high enough to do it on its own. If the pH drops enough, that matrix is going to form. You're going to have a curd, and you can make cheese from that. But if you want to make hard cheeses, most of those are not going to have that much lactic acid in them, and you're going to want to clabber your milk with rennet. So by adding rennet, we can speed that process up from taking maybe 3 days to taking maybe 30 minutes or an hour. So I will warm my milk, add my rennet when the curd has formed, and I've cut the curd, so I have a bunch of little curds now. I can warm that by adding hot water. You can make many delicious kinds of, this is called a washed curd method because you've added water, and you can make many delicious kinds of cheese using that method, just as our great-great-great-grandparents made cheese in a wooden vat by adding hot water to the curds as they went along. Cheese cooking curds usually doesn't go above about 104 degrees at any given time, and your hand is perfectly comfortable in a vat of 104-degree water. So you could do this in a wooden vat if you needed to. When you've made cheeses, now what we're about is you getting comfortable with using your milk in many different ways so that it can power your farm. One of the results of making cheese, which is a nice thing to have around and lets you save your summer glut of milk in forms that you can eat in the winter, but one of the side results is going to be that the vast majority of that milk is in the whey. Most of the solids, most of the food value is in your cheese, but you're going to have a ton of whey, which is going to have a lot of protein in it, not as much as the milk did, but still a lot, and a lot of vitamins and minerals, and you're going to want to be able to use that on the farm. Well, pigs love whey. I have yet to add a bucket of whey to the pig pen that they didn't wipe out, so there's kind of no limit to how much, within the limits of what your farm's going to produce, your pigs are going to wipe it out. 3 days after you get your dairy cow, you need a pig down in the barn. Whey is excellent pig food. It's about 1% protein, so if you're working out how much protein is in my pig's diet, you can look at that. And Walter, what's Walter's last name?
Jeffries.
Walter Jeffries of Sugar Mountain Farms in Vermont raises pigs on nothing but forage and whey. So it's a good protein source for pigs.
Okay, so here are some of the ways that we can use milk on the farm to feed our animals. With calves, we can a bucket calf or bottle calf. About 2 gallons a day is about what a calf. It's what you said. 1 to 2 gallons a day.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yes.
Just think 1, because the normal amount that you're going to give a calf is 1.
I'm playing Vanna White today.
Right, he's Vanna White. I wrote his notes wrong.
That's right.
1 gallon of milk is the standard allotment of milk to a calf. We tend to go higher than that because we like big fat calves and we have a lot of milk. But 1 to 2 gallons, 1 to 1.5 is what you're usually going to see on a website.
For the pig, 3 to 4 quarts is a whole day's protein from weaning to full grown, because they don't need as much protein when they are large as they do when they're small. So if you were just giving them that much milk, you're covering their protein rations. That doesn't mean that's all the food they're getting. They're getting all the other things you're throwing into that pig pen, but you will make sure, I know that they're getting their protein ration. For chickens, a quart is enough for 12 large or 24 small laying hens.
Again, that's not all they're getting, but that lets you produce farm-raised foods. All the trash from the garden, the mango wurzels and tramontino, and broom corn that we're handing out seeds for over here. These foods that are not high in protein, and you wonder, yeah, I'm feeding my pigs and they're getting a lot, but are they getting enough protein? When you add the milk to their diet, you can be sure that they are getting adequate protein for good growth and health.
For chicks and broilers, what we like to do, this is just for getting them started. It's full of probiotics and proteins, and it's really good for coccidiosis, so giving them some milk early on is great. For sick animals, one of the miracle foods we found is colostrum. So we will take the colostrum that the calf is not, the calf's not going to take all the colostrum. We'll take that and we'll freeze it, and then we will give it to sick animals, especially a sick pig, and it really cleans things up. It does a great job. And dogs and cats. All the animals on our farm are working animals, so dogs and cats are treated exactly the same. They are given some milk to keep them around, and then they are expected to do the majority of their getting food is from hunting. But the milk is great for keeping them saying, this is home for us. Then anything that doesn't turn out well goes into the pig pen. Any of the cheeses, any of the whey, any of the yogurt, that's...
If you're just overwhelmed, too, remember, the refrigerator doesn't need to hold all this milk, and the family certainly doesn't need to eat all this milk. You've got a pipeline to the sun through your dairy cow. It's falling on your farm every single day. And your job is to be comfortable with knowing that every bit of it is useful. It doesn't have to be laboriously turned into food for us. It can be shunted off to feed every other thing on the farm, including
the gardens. So, but we do like to, we like to say that we are drinking yesterday's sunshine. So it is coming down and we are drinking it the next day. But it is a great drench, an antifungal drench, a 10% solution. So 9 parts water, 1 part milk is a fabulous antifungal. Side dressings, again, a 10% solution of whey. And it's fabulous for heating up the compost pile. So if your compost is not going fast enough, pour some milk or whey on it, and boosting compost tea for any of you guys who make poo brew.
So we feel like we just want to race because we got through our whole outline before we had to finish. We have a little time for questions.
Well, stainless steel would...
The question was, what kind of bucket did we want?
Stainless steel would be the first thing that we'd absolutely do. And then the other things that what we're looking for are things where there is no lips or anything like that that are hard to clean. So I really like this. It's super easy to clean all the way around. There's nothing hiding. There's no curves or anything. So I would just
definitely
really
no
look
seam
over
at the bottom. You know how those cute galvanized ones have a seam? You don't want a seam at the bottom of your bucket.
That's right. Now, there are totes, and so when we milk up at the Franciscan Sisters, and then we're bringing the milk home in a tote. So we want to have then one with a lid. Those have some rollover, and it was very interesting. We were just talking to the Shenandoah people. They said that they eliminated that rollover precisely so that it was easy to clean. But then what they've discovered is they've now got a very sharp edge.
A slightly sharp edge.
And so what they are working on is how now to eliminate that sharp edge. So we really like Shenandoah because they are doing it, and they are saying, you communicate to us. Let us know what we can do to improve. So that would be, again, stainless steel, and then just be looking over this whole thing to make sure that it's easy to clean. And that these handles, again, the cutout is what we like best. You're wasting all that metal up here, but it really holds this up as opposed to the ones that just have brads or something
that are tacked to
holding it
the
on.
side,
That's right.
yeah.
Again, a good sturdy one. This is the size of bucket that we like. Okay.
2.5, 3 gallons.
And then on these funnels, you got to make sure that you got a funnel that will fit into whatever is your glass jar. We usually use half-gallon pickle jars for holding it, and you just got to make sure that this will fit in the top of it. These are small enough that they'll even go into into canning jars. So largemouth canning jars.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, other questions?
No, go ahead. Question is, how do we manage our calves? We let mamas raise calves. When you first get one cow, it's a little hard to like give yourself permission to let the calf take as much milk as he's going to. But we highly recommend mama raised calves. You're going to get a better calf that way. And when you let the calf stay on his or her mama, you have a professional milker who is deeply interested in his work, always at your elbow to take over for you. That does not mean that when your cow calves, you should assume that calf can take all her milk at the beginning. If this is your first cow, and you're thinking, oh yeah, the Dougherty said the calf will take the milk, remember that a dairy cow is a dairy cow because she makes more milk than a calf requires, which leaves some for you. And so you are going to milk from day one to make sure she gets milked out.
Milk twice a day.
You're going to milk twice a day at the beginning until you figure out how much milk does this cow produce, how much is the calf taking. What the calf takes is going to incline as he gets bigger. Eventually, you're going to say, little guy, you are not leaving enough milk for me.
He's now a pig.
At that point, you start locking them in the barn at night. You shut them apart from one another for half the day, usually at night. Milk mama at the end of that 12-hour period. You get that milk. She'll give the rest to the calf. Warning. She's very smart. She loves that calf better than she does you. The calf is going to get a lot of the cream. So if you've got a Jersey in the barn and you're thinking everybody said Jerseys give a lot of butter fat, and I know they don't because my cow's not giving it to me. If you're calf milk sharing, she's just hanging on to the cream and it's going to baby.
I don't know how she does it, but she manages to hold that cream.
Baby's getting it. And when you wean that baby entirely and she realizes it's you or nobody, she'll start giving you all of that cream.
Okay, unfortunately we're out of time. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you're all convinced you need to have a dairy cow.
You need a cow.
And we will be right over here and we will answer any questions that you have. And remember, email us when you have issues.